I have the pleasure today to introduce David Brown, who's the CEO of Valley Leadership. So I was sitting here talking with him, and I found out that he grew up in Tempe, and he originally started his career in accounting. But from 2001 to 2003, he was a CASA. And if you don't know what CASA is, it is a court-appointed special advocate for a child who needs to go to court because they're in foster care and that sort of thing. And that is when he really decided, oh man, I really want to give back to the community. And so he decided to start changing his focus from accounting. And really for about 6 years, he was traveling from DC to Arizona. You guys can see his work history in the Road Arizonian. But then he decided, I really want to give back to Arizona. And what better place to do that than at Valley Leadership? So how many people here have been involved with Valley Leadership in the past? Fantastic, and I know that there's a couple more people that aren't here today. So I am really excited for him to tell us about what Valley Leadership is and where it's going in the next 40 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you, Alistair, for arranging this with your father. I'm sorry that I preempted your joke. It's hard. It's hard. All right. It's hard to follow Bette Midler and then not get a joke, and then there's this Dave Brown guy talking about pivots and other things. So bear with me, and you'll have some more on the screen here. But as Angela mentioned, born and raised here in Arizona. My parents are originally from Chicago, and especially this week are very glad they made that choice in the 70s. My dad actually came out here and started working for Greyhound Capital, for those of you that remember Greyhound Capital, in Greyhound that had headquarters here just up the street, and never looked back on the cold, and I'm thankful for it because having grown up in Arizona, one of the things I missed living in DC was how early it got warm here. You know, in April and May, you still wake up in Virginia and it's cold out, and you got to put a coat on, and it warms up over the course of the day. But what I really missed most about Arizona was why you look out these windows and you have people golfing in green, and it's warm, and it's just warm in February, now January, but it's exciting to be back here in Arizona. And I've been CEO of Valley Leadership for a year and a half, next week actually, and it's been fantastic. I spent early part of my career, as Angela said, working as an accountant, got bored with that. I hope there's no one here from Navigant Consulting or Arthur Andersen. I know there's actually nobody from Arthur Andersen because Arthur Andersen doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately, because of Enron. But wanted to do more and went back to school in California to pursue public administration and what could be done in communities to build out important things that needed to be addressed. So after spending back and forth time between DC and here, found Valley Leadership and not heard of Valley Leadership. Most exciting thing about now a year and a half is over the 100, 200 people that I've met with, alumni, stakeholders, who, when given the job, gave me the charge to say, you know, Valley Leadership's now been around 40 years. What does the next 40 years of Valley Leadership look like? In particular, given where Phoenix is. So having grown up here, and seen Phoenix grow dramatically. I went to a small Catholic school in Chandler. It was small at the time, Seton Catholic. We would such a small school. We would go for sports, play all the smaller cities around the state. And Queen Creek was one that was way out there. And now Queen Creek is just, you go through suburban to get to Queen Creek, which is its own little city now. So the fact that Phoenix has grown as it has, and now fifth largest city, I felt, and the board felt, and the alumni that I had spoken to felt that there's a pivot to be made within Valley Leadership organizationally. How do we approach the city and the state that now is more complicated, has more sophisticated, systemic kind of issues happening, and not so much we can tackle something here because it's smaller and more manageable, but we got to start thinking bigger, longer term. And that's the genesis of what we call our pivot. And moving away from a leadership program that many of you have been through, that's 9 months start to finish, with the expectation and hope that you'll go on and do great things afterwards, and our alumni have, but being a little more strategic about how we connect the dots of that action. How do we get 40 years of influential people of substance, people with hands on levers to move things in various issues? How do we coordinate that a little better and leverage those people? So We want to see more long-term approaches, more long-term impact on Arizona's most pressing issues. We tweaked our mission statement to say that we'll empower, leverage, and mobilize leaders to meaningfully impact the most pressing issues facing Arizona. So a very clear stake in the ground around one, identifying what those issues are and using our partners and stakeholders to find out what are the big issues in Arizona, but then working backwards through all of our programming and everything we do to make sure we're setting up leaders to do just that. When I started, talked with many alumni, all doing great things, and again, there was that strategic kind of opportunity to say, if we got you in a room with this person and these groups, what could happen as a result, given our fuel of leaders over 40 years? So our pivot is based in that feedback from our alumni. This is not something that, as the new leader of Valley Leadership, I wanted to do personally. I think it's needed, and I'm excited to do it and lead that charge and execution. But it really came from our alumni, and I can't see it up here quite as easily, maybe on the next slide, where one quote I use that came out of the alumni survey where an alumni had said, given the talent, creativity, care for the community, and network, Valley Leadership should be doing major projects for major issues facing Arizona. And we took that really to heart and started thinking about how we do that. So we have a couple of ways that will happen. One of the guiding kind of instructions or directions we've really taken to heart as well is what we're calling our principles of doing. So how Valley Leadership cultivates leadership. And it's not, again, leaving it to luck that people will lead, leaving it to their own ambition and their own energy and enthusiasm about wanting to be a leader and having that impact in the community, but really fostering that at the outset. And we came up with what we're calling our principles of doing, which for me, exciting, a couple of people that really helped form this, and I'm sure you know both. Denise Resnick, who helped found SARC in first place just up the street, and then Bill Post, former APS CEO, really spent good time with them to think through how do we get our current 40 years of leaders thinking in the right way together, and how do we get our next 40 years of leaders thinking in the right way. And we felt like, given the conversations in the country, civility is a thing now. Civility is all the rave, actually, across the country about how do we talk to each other civilly and have conversations at the table and not resort to our corners. And we felt like, yep, we want that, and that clearly exists in the spirit and work of our alumni over 40 years. But we wanted to add to that. We wanted to really press down and say, what can we be doing? What can we accomplish today? Whether it's large or small, what can be done? And getting our mentality and mindset into, if we're going to have that happen, certain things need to happen as well. We need to build trust with people that we may not like personally. We may not like their policy positions, but we got to figure out if we want to move something forward and solve something, we got to get our leaders thinking in that same way too. Senator Kyle was our luncheon speaker at our water program day in December, and he kind of bemoaned the lack of in D.C. that, the regular order that John McCain talked a lot about, where you had the R's and the D's, Republicans and Democrats come together and say, let's look at an issue from both our sides, go back to our committees, hash it out, think of what we want. And Senator Kyle mentioned how those days aren't really there in D.C. anymore. And just generally, that kind of, we'll come together with different viewpoints to solve a problem, and we'll see what happens. And he talked about consensus, and he said, when you get to consensus, it means people had to compromise, both sides. And consensus leads to getting something done. So we really wanted to figure out how we operationalize the spirit and value of that, given that Valley Leadership has 40 years of people from all over political spectrums and all sorts of different sectors, that obviously as people won't always agree on things, but how do we get them in the right mindset that this is about a team, that we're going to do something as a team. You're going to have to give up something here, I'm going to have to give up something there, but in the interest of getting something done for Arizona, that's what we'll have to do. So these principles reflect what we're calling our new way of doing things. I'm going to skip over here, which is the Valley Impact Maker, which is you finish the program and now what? And we heard that from a lot of alumni, that I want to get engaged, but I don't know how and where. We visited a leadership program in Denver who 5 years ago set out on this path as well to say, we don't want to just leave it to chance that these people do great things. How do they become Colorado? And they actually describe themselves as Colorado's DNA. When you think about what Colorado is about, what Colorado is doing and leading on, you're thinking of the people who went through my program. And we liked that articulation. We felt like, what is a means that can allow that to happen with our alumni that have already gone through the program, and then alumni that will go through the program for the next 40 years. And we came up with this thing called the Valley Impact Maker, which is a evergreen, consistent way of engaging leaders, both from our alumni and from our partners, into issues strategically, where we're really thinking about how we're framing those issues. We're thinking about how we want to connect people within those issues, and then how we take action on those issues. How do we activate and do things under those principles of doing where we're driven to do? And we have it's launched last fall in November. We had $1 million investment from 5 big foundations here: Arizona Community Foundation, Vitalist, Helios, Polium, and Piper all contributed to it. We have more partners coming on board to contribute to it. Because they like this idea of how these teams will work. We're not just going to say we have this captive audience of leaders who really care about health. Here you go, health organizations, go solve things. We have every year a group who we expect to get involved in some issue in some way, and we just didn't want to hand them off. We wanted to say, how do we get the right people and the right groups in a room to figure out what it is we want to solve? And what does that look like? What's a time frame? What is the execution model? What is the course of doing in those spaces? So what we've done is we've launched 2 teams, one in education and one in health, that have, through framing and connecting the right dots of our alumni with strategic partners working in that space, to really sit down. We had our launch meetings last December to sit down and say, initially, what can we all work together on? We have an interested set of VL alumni, and that continues to grow. We had over 125 alumni participate in the launching of the 2 teams. What are they interested in doing and solving in health? What are groups ready to help that momentum move on things already happening within education and health? And set up that kind of timeline of doing for the next 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. You know, I'm always quoting Bill Post when we initially had talked over the last several months around the desire and need to start that kind of long-term outlook for Phoenix, for Arizona, and move away from a kind of a legislative-based cycle of every year we got to make sure these things get done, to start thinking about, well, what is 5 years outlook for education, for health, for child welfare and child well-being, for water? Everybody uses the example of water being, that's how it got done in the olden days, 40, 50 years ago, not to insult anyone that remembers that, but the way that they all had to come together and each bite a bullet to get something done for water, to make sure that we had a water plan, otherwise none of us are going to be able to live here. And how do we do that for other issues so that there's that long-term outlook on solving the things that Arizona would need to invest? So we've launched these teams. We're excited about these teams. There will be more teams in other issue areas that will be launched to start really thinking about what can we tackle now and get a sense of how we work together as a team, and that we see some results. Everything is results driven. Peter Drucker, if you don't measure it, you don't do it. We're going to make sure we're measuring. We're going to make sure we're having outputs so that we can see progress made, and not necessarily progress made that isn't being made already, but is more accelerated, is advanced. As we've talked to our strategic partners in the health and education space, they're already doing great work. We're trying to help fuel that with our leadership pipeline in a more intentional way. So now when we recruit for our classes, our cohorts, we have 2 main cohorts, the one that's been around 40 years, which is Institute, which is more of that middle-aged type group, senior people in the nonprofit, private, and government sectors, to really get to go through a program over 9 months to really be ready to work in these issue areas. So with that cohort, and then a newer cohort, which we're calling Accelerate, which is in its 4th year for younger, newer to the Valley, don't really know what's going on group, what do they need to know in order to engage on these issues? And that's the whole point. Is as we looked at Denver and other places, it was You Can Learn is a typical leadership program has done for 30, 40 years, and they're all over the country. Here's what police are working on. Here's what schools are working on. Here's what health proponents are working on. We wanted it to move a little and pivot more towards what do leaders need to know about those issues in Arizona in order to then go work in those spaces and have impact. So it's slightly tweaked. It's, again, the spirit of Valley leadership over the last 40 years isn't changing. We still have that spirit of getting things done and having impact. It's just how we do it is tweaked so that we're more deliberate about, at the end of the day, a cohort of 50 people go through, and we hope a cohort of 50 people go and engage in an issue strategically with partners working in that space. They're expected to do it. We're going to measure that they do it, and that we see some motion in that thinking of how long-term change and impact is made in communities on a variety of issues. So we hope if anyone is interested, or you think that there might be someone that you know that's interested, please let me know. Again, we have the main two programs. Both start recruitment in March. Applications go up around April for the next cohort. We're calling our current class, Class 40, the Pivot class. They're very proud of that. For those of you that are in the VL family, I'm sure anytime you meet an alumni, they're part of Class X, the best class ever. The Pivot, and that's 32, 8, 1, everybody, they all the best class ever, which they're, again, very proud of, which we're excited about. Class 40 calls them the best just got better, which I also like the tweak on how they're the start of the next 40 years. And again, really thinking about it in that longer term space, that more scaled version of I need to figure out how I'm going to be part of how Phoenix addresses issues, how Arizona addresses issues in these various ways. So if you're interested and want to know more about what we're doing and how we're doing it, please let me know. My email is dave@valleyleadership.org. I'm happy to talk with any of you. I'm always looking for ideas, again, having grown up here, but not spent a lot of time being part of the DC. I was a lobbyist working on appropriations in DC, and my brain only had that much space for all the politics that come with DC, barely enough space for that. That I'm starting to learn again what the issues are in Arizona and the people that are solving those issues and the people that want to help solve those issues. So I'm always looking for input on, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that group? All the interesting things that Rotary is doing and has been doing for many, many years. Want to learn more about how we can engage with you and your work so that there's leverage. At the end of the day, the one thing I took away from DC and my work there was if you want members of Congress to give you money, you need to show leverage. You can't be, we gave you $1 and you spent $1. The group I lobbied for was given $1 and leveraged it 90 times. And as a result, our appropriation went like this. And to me, the Valley leadership pool of leaders is the ultimate leverageable thing for Arizona, given everything that they've been doing, where they are in the Valley, and I'm very excited about leading that charge. So anyone have any questions? I'm happy to take some questions. I don't know how much time I have left, but I'm happy to always ask questions. Always reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to anybody. Thank you.
Two questions. How are you going to relate to the Arizona Town Hall? And if you're looking at a statewide level, you're still Valley leadership. How are you going to get around that?
Two great questions. So one of the first people I met on the job, Tara Jackson with Arizona Town Hall. She is one of our, actually a strategic and visionary partner in the education space. Lots of ways we're going to work together on the work they do every year to identify an issue. So those of you that are not familiar with Arizona Town Hall, they pick an issue every year. Really dissect it, gather people from all over the state to figure out what we should do about it. That's going to help inform, for example, our education impact team will help inform what we're going to do, what that team's work is going to do. And that's a great question for another reason, we're not creating any programs. So we're not going to say Valley Leadership, especially with this $1 million infusion, is now going to run education programs or run health programs. We're going to take that and leverage the work being done by Arizona Town Hall, and by Center for Future of Arizona, and by Expect More Arizona, and by A for Arizona, all the groups that are working on things in the education space. We're going to work with them to fuel leaders into that, so that the work they're doing and the programs they're doing, we assist. So we're not going to be another nonprofit that starts more programming. And that was something I learned too, especially with those alumni in here who had class projects. The kind of finite temporal time frame of your projects was 9 months. And I kept hearing, like, things aren't just finite to those 9 months. How do we expand that? And then how do we do class projects that aren't recreating wheels or starting new nonprofits when that work is already being done? And that gets to that leverage point. We want to leverage Arizona Town Hall's work in the spaces that they're doing. I know their next issue is health, so everything is lining up, and we've already talked with them. And again, we're pleased that they're a visionary partner who's helping on that. And then related to the state. So this is actually a misnomer because on the other slides it says the Valley Impact Maker. Everything we took the Valley off of part of this, and the board had a really kind of heart-to-heart conversation around what does that mean to take it off. And we're Valley Leadership, and we've been Phoenix Metro-based for 40 years. What does it mean when we may say we're state? And for us, it was more about reflect the new mission. The mission is to empower, leverage, and mobilize leaders to meaningfully impact Arizona's most pressing issues. And that may not just be confined, and would likely not be confined to just Maricopa County, for example. Water. We had our Water Day in conjunction, in partnership with Sandra Day O'Connor Institute, and we had people from Tucson, from Yuma, from the CAP up north, that was providing input on what our leaders need to know beyond just what happens with water once it reaches Phoenix. We had Grady Gamage Jr., who could spend hours just talking about what water looks like in Phoenix, but we felt like in order for these leaders to have impact in water and to know enough to lead in water, they're going to have to know about water as it relates to the entire state. So that is an evolving thing of how we're going to address things statewide. We have some conversations with some partners around what that might look like. Again, we're taking a cue from Colorado. Colorado has a whole leadership program where they twice a year take a cohort to different parts of Colorado, spend a week there. The local non-Denver metro group learns about what's happening in Denver and vice versa. We hear that, I heard that in DC, rural is always kind of, back burner on every issue because it's the cities that get all the priorities, it's the cities that get all the attention. Yet many things, especially in Arizona where it's diverse, not only within a metro area, but then you expand outside of metro area, it gets even more diverse. We're gonna have to pay attention to that if we want to solve those problems for Arizona. For example, our health impact team, one of the first things we're going to tackle, one of two things, food and nutrition. The second one is opioids. Opioids in Maricopa County looks very different than opioids in western Arizona, in Kingman area, for example. So how do we want to move the needle on improving outcomes in the opioid space in Arizona and the crisis in Arizona? Are we just going to look at Phoenix Metro, or are we going to look at outside of that to see where there might be more problem spots and how we might solve them?
Historically, Valley Leadership's done a lot for youth. Is that still part of the vision? And if so, could you address what your plans are?
Yes, so thank you. So our third program, I failed to mention, is Valley Leadership Youth. So that's our third program we continue to use. That historically has been kind of up and down of what kind of program we want that to be. We are taking a hard look at it now to reflect this mission. For example, our health impact team launched, and we had alumni from the Institute, Accelerate, and someone from youth. And we want to see more of that. We want to get them early. Right now, our youth program takes a grant from Arizona Community Foundation, and over 2 months looks at philanthropy, learns about philanthropy, what does philanthropy mean, and then they actually distribute a grant to the charity of their choice or the work of their choice based on that experience over the 2 months. So we're looking at how, it's interesting, I was just mentioning how we're talking with ASU now about a formal handoff from ASU graduates that we want to have stay in Arizona and how they get into that Accelerate program, that younger kind of newer to Arizona type program, and talking with Dr. Wilkinson over there to say, who are the captive audiences over at ASU, and Alistair, your group too, that we can start talking to them to get them excited about Arizona so that they can see their place in Arizona and where they could have impact in Arizona. It makes more for established roots to stay in Arizona. And then we've started to think about how do we go further down the track there? How do we get into high schools? And we ran our youth program last year, and it was amazing to see, for me anyway, and I still consider myself young. I'm not, with various ailments, I'm getting older by the day. their interpretation and their view of philanthropy and what it means to have impact is not what I remember. It's not necessarily you write checks, it's about the work and what does that check lead to, and how do I experience that more. We've taken a look even at how millennials do their resumes now are impact-based. These are the number of people I've served, whether as a sales agent, and in my community service, this is how many grocery bags I've packed. Very visual and very different about the doing they've done rather than these places need money. And that was what was interesting takeaway from our last youth program is when you start with millennials and you start going further back, how people contribute to communities and have impact is changing. And that's definitely a part of where we see, the youth of today are going to be what Arizona is 40 years from now, and we want to get them early on how they think about how they give back to communities. Thank you very much.
David, thank you very much for sharing your vision of Valley leadership and for being with us today. We've prepared a certificate for you and made a donation to Family Promise of Greater Phoenix. It's one of the 4 charities that we're supporting this year, and thank you once again.